When I say that in the past year I have grown to deeply appreciate horror, I'm not just referring to the supernatural and strange, the chills caused by a truly frightening experience, or the creativity often found within. Much more is it the depiction of everyday life, the horror found in the commonplace. Stories that are brave enough to explore this vast place of misery one may face in reality, explore its effects under different circumstances, guilt that has been suppressed indefinitely, betrayal by those you thought of as closest, horror caused from one to another, horror caused by oneself. Whenever exposed to such titles, they never really seem to leave my mind after. In fact, the more time passes, the more do I find myself appreciating them. Appreciating them not necessarily just for their content, but the sacrifices made for the sake of the content. Risking entertainment for accurate portrayal. Risking a drop in viewership by refusing to palliate anything, regardless whether fictional or not. If we look at the film The Pianist, we may find such sacrifices. A real story of the Polish pianist Władysław Szpilman, who survived the Holocaust. I remember watching it and felt like I was holding my breath for its entire duration. Scenes that were so disturbing, they left me processing for weeks. Now this movie is 2.5 hours long, and despite being truly horrifying, I think a majority of people would be able to withstand it. If we move to fictional grounds, The Peaky Blinders, on the other hand, last 6 seasons with 6 episodes an hour each. Recently, I rewatched the show because I missed out on the last season. To say that the end of the show was depressing would be an understatement. It was genuinely difficult to finish everything simply because there was nothing left to enjoy. In the moment, I found myself not necessarily bored, but really exhausted. One could reasonably argue that it could have been shorter, but at the end of the day, maybe that would have taken away from its impact. We follow the seemingly limitless ambitions of a man who is plagued by severe trauma of the First World War. A man who would do or is almost forced to do whatever it takes to get what he wants. If it means walking over a pile of corpses, so be it. First, we see the glory and pride that come with climbing the ranks, and shortly after the repercussion and loss that follow. Until the very end, you're left with nothing, not even yourself, since that too was lost along the way. What I love about the show is how well it portrays the themes it covers. Neither is anything being romanticized nor simply written off as evil. Every action has simply a consequence. Some are mild, some are severe. And it is those that are severe that work so well because of its disturbing exposition. Ambition, for example, often portrayed as a good quality in man, but never does one talk about its drawbacks. A sword that cuts both ways. Another would be exposing the poor state mental health was in back then and how that may impact us today. We may start to understand just how important it is to act upon traumatic experiences and not simply brush them off. Taking everything into account, one may argue that we'd find a majority of us even follow in the protagonist's footsteps, if circumstances were similar. Morality ceases to be just black and white. While film and television can offer one kind of experience, I would also like to delve into other mediums. I believe when one mentions horror and video games, some of the first titles that come to mind are Resident Evil, Outlast, or in a lot of other cases as well, Silent Hill. A franchise with its first game releasing in 1999, which is still being talked about today. With countless essays, some better, some worse, everyone attempts to depict the seemingly endless layers and complexity of it. I played the remake of Silent Hill 2 last year, and not too long after, I got myself a PlayStation 2 and bought the third installment for an outrageous price. These two play rather different from each other, and I don't necessarily mean the technicality, such as the horrific tank controls of the third part, which were probably the very first jump scare I experienced in that game. More so, I would like to take a look at the pacing and usage of horror. When you play through Silent Hill 2, you feel a sort of balance, similar to Berserk, which I will talk about later as well. In the midst of fear and tension, you find yourself yearning for a break, enjoying those peaceful moments within the game more than anything else really. Horror is fascinating to work with because it can induce such a volatile range of feelings and emotions, and therefore act as a stark contrast towards those moments of silence. You may walk for a certain duration of time with nothing really happening, yet it is that very pause that releases all of the tension. It's chilling to stand in front of a door, gate, or a place that seems to crush all discomfort and throw you right back into the pit, kind of similar to the real world. Only when we walk through our plight can we experience catharsis and a sense of resolve. A moment that may pass but potentially strengthen us. Contrary to Thomas Shelby, who refused to, or more so was unable to work through his traumatic events at given times, we find no sort of resolve like that towards the end. Horror can be deeply realistic, or in cases of Silent Hill, act through vague, disturbing creatures and environments as an embodiment. Here, a disturbing but nonetheless creative way of depicting frustration, both sexual and emotional, guilt, desire, and punishment. Enrich the horror by creating layers to dig through, to actively think and understand. At the same time, it's a trait that should be used with caution. Like seasoning, it could either make or break everything. As I played Silent Hill 3, for instance, just like 2, I was instantly hooked by the scenery and overly eerie atmosphere. But as I went on, the horror never seemed to stop, and I found myself blasting my way through the monsters. Since the third part was a sequel to the first and was less personal and psychological overall, there was also nothing that kept me digging for more. The horror became less frightening and simply annoying, shattering the atmosphere in an instant. It's very rare that titles like these are found at the top in terms of their popularity. Reasonably so. Not only is it uncomfortable and difficult to consume given media, but it often works as a mirror. Remind us of our vices and regret, our guilt and mistakes, our fears and shortcomings. At the same time, that is what makes them so important. This kind of horror is not simply there to be just enjoyed, but for us to take in, to not turn and forget, distract ourselves, do anything and everything to just avoid looking within. Once again, countless analysis and essays that break down this body of work in detail, often more than is necessary. Point is, my deep appreciation for Berserk comes from its relatability of struggle and tenacity. The struggle may be a different one that finds itself in the deepest pits of darkness searching for a single ray of light, but the essence of it very easily translates to all of us. I doubt any human has walked this earth without worry or fear, without facing a seemingly impenetrable wall, without hopelessness or despair. We all are dealt a hand of cards. One may be rotten of sickness, one cut and ripped to pieces. But seeing this one man push through one man against himself and seemingly the entire world introduces a sense of hope, bravery, and relentlessness. It shows how horror can consume, but also make one question what is held important in their life, what is futile to pursue, what is a fleeting moment to be taken for granted, trying to find any sort of joy in an insufferable life. I have a twisted love for horror, not because of what it is, but for what it does and can do. It can be as simple as a jump scare by a woman with long black hair and a white dress. For some reason it is always a woman with long black hair and a white dress, or it can be as complex as a maze full of dead ends. It has the capacity to induce shock, but also open doors to fragility. It says things nobody wants to say, it shows things nobody wants to see, but more often than not, those are the very things important to bring change and prevention. So such things do not happen again, or will ever happen in the first place. And so I could have made this an hour-long essay, but I believe that much can be said with few words. This video's purpose is not an appeal to go and consume every single horror movie, game, and story out there, but to maybe try and see if there's more to it than just blatant scares and horrific screams. Sometimes consuming given media in portion with breaks can be a better way than simply taking it all in a burst, especially when it tends to be very dark. Silent Hill 2 takes around 17 hours to complete, give or take, depending how you play it, but it took me over a month to finish. Yet because it took so long, I was able to really give each segment time without exhausting by some of the most stress-inducing areas in all of gaming. Thus, it quickly became one of my favorite games of all time. So horror may be unpleasant, but it is that very horror that can move us to take action, to confront, to overcome, to heal.